They say Nimrod was just a myth, a hunter, a king, a legend. But what if the story of Nimrod, Enki, Anu, and the Nephilim is more than ancient memory? What if it is the spiritual blueprint that shaped all religions, all empires, and even the world you live in today? Across Sumerian tablets and biblical records, from the ziggurats of Babel to the pyramids of Giza, a haunting pattern emerges. The Tower of Babel wasn't just a monument, it was a rebellion. And its architect, Nimrod, wasn't just a king, he was the prototype of every tyrant who defied the Most High. His name echoes in secret societies, in fallen angels, and in the modern obsession with false gods and ancient wisdom. Why do cultures across time, from the Egyptians to the Greeks, worship the same gods under different names? Inanna, Ishtar, Isis, Aphrodite. Why does the serpent, the eagle, and the horned crown appear again and again in myths and temples? Could it be that these are not just stories, but remnants of a truth too powerful to ignore? In this video, you will discover the untold origins of all religions, tracing the forgotten thread from Noah to Nimrod, from Anu to Enki, from Babel to your backyard. We'll decode the true meaning of the ancient Sumerian gods, explore the dark arts they passed to humanity, and expose the pattern of deception that still entangles the world today. You'll understand why the rebellion at Babel still matters. Why Inanna, the goddess of fertility and war, didn't disappear, she just changed names. Why fallen angels weren't just cast out, they were worshipped. And why what you believe about God, faith, and identity may have roots deeper and darker than you ever imagined. So I ask you, have we been worshipping the same spirits in disguise? Have the secret arts of Nimrod's empire never truly left us? Or worse, are they rising again, hidden in plain sight? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is the story of Babel just a myth? Or is it the origin of the world's greatest deception? And if you believe truth matters, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still wonders why history repeats. Because once you see the pattern, you can never unsee it. Welcome to the journey. After the flood, the world was silent, washed clean, but not without memory. The waters had receded, but the pain remained. The ark had rested on the mountains of Ararat, and from its wooden womb stepped the only 8 survivors of a broken world. Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their wives. These were not just people, they were bearers of legacy. Each carried in their hearts not only the trauma of a drowned earth, but the knowledge of what had come before, the days of giants, the sons of God mingling with the daughters of men, and the corruption that demanded a divine reset. It would be a mistake to think that post-flood humanity began as primitive. The survivors were not cavemen. They were witnesses of the old world, people who had lived beside angels and monsters, who had built cities and mastered music, metallurgy, agriculture, and the stars. Genesis tells us that even before the flood, men like Tubal-Cain forged tools of bronze and iron, while Jubal invented instruments of strings and wind. These were civilizations of brilliance and beauty, but tainted by pride and perversion. So as the sons of Noah walked down from the mountains, they did not step into ignorance, they stepped into survival. They carried the blueprints of greatness within them, but the land was barren, and their hands were tired. They used sticks before steel, stones before swords, and yet, in their memories, lived the songs of lyres, the strength of towers, and the rituals of gods, long silenced by the flood. It was from this world that cultures were born again. Shem, from whom the Semitic peoples would come, including Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Japheth, whose children would spread across Europe and Asia, becoming the ancestors of Greeks, Scythians, and Thracians. But it was Ham, and from him Cush, Egypt, Canaan, who would birth the man whose shadow still looms over all earthly kingdoms, Nimrod. Nimrod was the son of Cush, grandson of Ham, great-grandson of Noah. But he was more than a man. The scriptures call him a mighty one on the earth, a mighty hunter before the Lord. In Hebrew, the root word for Nimrod is marad, he who rebelled. And rebel he did. He took the knowledge of the old world and twisted it. He remembered the secret arts, the forbidden sciences, and the worship once given to the fallen ones. And he used them not to serve God, but to replace him. While others wandered and settled, Nimrod built. Not tents, but cities. Not altars to El Elyon, the Most High, but ziggurats that reached toward the heavens. Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, Nineveh. He carved an empire with stone and fear. He did not unite by love, but by domination. Nimrod gathered the people with one language, one purpose, and one faith. A faith not in the Creator, but in created things. The Tower of Babel was not merely a building, it was a symbol. A monument of man's defiance, its foundation laid with bricks of rebellion and mortar of pride. Its height, a challenge to heaven itself. It was not just a place to reach the skies, it was a stairway for the gods. For Nimrod had begun to reintroduce the worship of the old ones, the fallen angels, the Nephilim, the ones who once corrupted flesh and spirit. He brought forth Inanna, the goddess of war and sexuality, and proclaimed her the bride of An, the sky god of Sumer. Their sacred marriage ritual, the hieros gamos, was reenacted on the rooftops of temples, blending ecstasy with divinity, corruption with ceremony. These were not celebrations of love, but reenactments of celestial rebellion. Through these rites, new gods were born, not from the heavens, but from unholy union. And so it began again. The pantheon. An, the Most High of Sumer, mirrored El Elyon. Enki, the cunning one, bearer of secret knowledge, slithered back into memory like the serpent he represented. Enlil, the thunderer, rose with the eagle's wings. Inanna became Ishtar, became Isis, became Aphrodite. Their names changed, but their essence remained. Spirits of deception cloaked in culture. Yet Nimrod's genius was not only in myth-making, it was in empire-building. He fused politics with religion, magic with statecraft. He taught that loyalty to the king was loyalty to the gods. And by making himself the mediator between heaven and earth, he became the first Antichrist, a shadow of a coming one who would also unite nations under false worship. Archaeological records, even beyond the Bible, speak of Enmerkar, the lord of Uruk. This name appears in Sumerian tablets as the builder of the great temple of Inanna, dedicated to An and Inanna. His image is found between two lions in the ancient symbol known as the Master of Animals. He is remembered as giant-like, mighty, and venerated. But he is also remembered as the one who led humanity into confusion, Babel. The confusion of tongues at Babel was not a punishment of anger, but a mercy of restraint. God scattered the languages not to destroy man's unity, but to prevent universal corruption. For had Nimrod succeeded, the world would have been lost again, not to flood, but to fire. But even in dispersion, the spirit of Babel did not die. It fragmented. It morphed. The gods of Sumer spread across the earth. Inanna became Astarte in Syria, Isis in Egypt, Durga in India, Aphrodite in Greece. The same rituals, the same demonic wisdom, Only the names changed. The serpent slithered into every culture, hissing sweet truths wrapped in lies. The eagle soared as a false emblem of divine authority. Today, their echoes remain, in symbols, in festivals, in ideologies. The Olympic flame, the winged goddess, the crown of horns. All traces of a religion that never died, only disguised itself. We build towers still, of glass and pride. We unify in digital languages. We worship success, beauty, intellect, pleasure. The pantheon is full, and the altars are busy. But they are not altars to the Most High. The story of Nimrod is not ancient history. It is a warning, a mirror. He built Babel. We build globalism. He made himself the voice of the gods. We crown influencers and philosophers. He revived the gods of old. We repurpose their names for brands, for franchises, for narratives. But beneath it all, beneath the architecture, the algorithms, the affirmations, are the same spirits that once sought to dethrone heaven. Yet even here in this chaos, there is grace. The God of Noah, of Shem, of Abraham. He is not silent. He called Abraham out of Ur, the very city Nimrod ruled. He revealed himself again as El Elyon, not An, not Enki, not Marduk. And just as he confused languages, he also sent a word that would unify the world, not in tyranny, but in truth. The lesson of Nimrod is this: power without submission becomes rebellion. Knowledge without reverence becomes sorcery. Unity without righteousness becomes Babel. And worship, when misdirected, enslaves the soul. But the God Most High still calls, still redeems, still restores. So we walk this line between memory and destiny. The towers are rising again, the names are ancient, but the faces are new, and the question remains, whose kingdom are we building? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Nimrod's empire ever truly ended, or are we still living in its shadow? If this story awakens something in you, let it awaken someone else. Like, subscribe, and send this truth into a world that desperately needs to remember what was, so it can see what's coming. The Tower of Babel was not merely bricks and ambition, it was the altar of a new religion, a belief system where man became his own god, where unity without truth birthed confusion, and where power without humility spiraled into darkness. Nimrod's empire was not held together by love or covenant, but by fear, by domination, and by a perverted spirituality resurrected from the ruins of a drowned world. And the temples he built were not homes for the divine. They were gateways to something far more deceptive, the worship of fallen beings cloaked in glory. The center of Nimrod's empire was Babel, but its soul was Uruk. And there, in the very cradle of Sumerian civilization, the spiritual infrastructure of the world's first global cult was laid. Nimrod was not content to merely govern the land, he longed to govern the heavens. But to do so, he needed more than walls and weapons. He needed myth. He needed magic, he needed gods, and he resurrected them with masterful precision. At the heart of his pantheon stood Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and sacred sexuality. She was not a creation of human longing, but the reawakening of an ancient force. Nimrod took her from the mountains, as the Sumerian texts say, and placed her beside Anu, the sky god, declaring their union divine. The rituals that followed were not innocent expressions of faith. They were hieros gamos, sacred marriages between priestesses and kings, played out on the rooftops of ziggurats, those towering temples that mimicked mountains. These acts were meant to replicate divine conception, to bring forth gods among men. But what they truly birthed was spiritual deception, one that entwined the sacred with the sensual, the heavenly with the earthly, the divine with the demonic. These ceremonies weren't relics of a distant past. They became the template for temple prostitution in Canaan, for the mysteries of Isis in Egypt, for the veiled rites of Aphrodite in Greece. They were adopted, adapted, and absorbed into countless cultures. And even today, their influence lingers in subtle echoes, in entertainment, in fashion, in ideologies that glorify pleasure as power, that mistake sensuality for divinity. The world tells us to embrace the goddess within, but rarely questions who that goddess truly is. The symbols followed too. The eagle, majestic and soaring, came to represent Anu's heavenly authority. The serpent, winding and wise, became the mark of Enki's cunning. Together, these symbols were carved into stone, painted onto temples, etched into legends. But they were more than decoration. They were declarations. The eagle and the serpent represented opposing forces, one of divine order, one of forbidden knowledge, and yet both were worshipped. This duality, this spiritual tension, reflected the battle within mankind's soul, the desire to rise like the eagle and the temptation to crawl like the serpent. We see this pattern not only in mythology, but in modern identity. How often do we elevate intellect, self-expression, sexuality, and control as the highest truths? How often do we fashion our beliefs not around revelation, but around what feels powerful? This was the essence of Babel, not merely building upward, but inward, not just climbing to heaven, but crowning ourselves as gods. There's a reason why the same gods reappear across cultures. Inanna is Ishtar. She is Astarte. She is Aphrodite. She is Durga. She is Isis. The names changed with tongues, but the spirit remained. These deities didn't vanish. They adapted. And Nimrod's brilliance was that he didn't fight the memory of the flood. He co-opted it. He wove old truths with new lies. He told people what they remembered, but filled the gaps with perversion. And so the worship of the fallen angels resumed. The Nephilim, the offspring of divine rebellion, once again entered human imagination, not as villains, but as heroes, demigods, saviors. Nimrod's empire revived the old fascination with giants, with secret arts, with the mysteries of the heavens. It was a religious renaissance of rebellion. He built his empire on that foundation. Babel wasn't merely a city, it was a portal, a place where heaven and earth were meant to meet, but not on God's terms. The ziggurats were not simply temples, they were stairways for spirits. And as man climbed them, he descended into a bondage disguised as enlightenment. This is where we must look beyond history and into our hearts. For the towers we build today are no less symbolic. They rise as skyscrapers of ego, as ideologies of self-worship, as algorithms of influence. Our temples may glow with LED, but the gods are the same, We speak many languages now, but the spiritual confusion remains. We are more connected than ever, yet more divided. We crave unity, yet rebel against truth. We hunger for transcendence, but settle for simulation. The lesson of Nimrod is not merely about rebellion, it is about replication. Every generation is tempted to build Babel again. Every generation tries to crown itself in place of the Creator. And every generation hears the whisper of the serpent, the call of the eagle, the lure of the forbidden. But even as Babel rose, heaven did not stay silent. God came down, not in wrath but in mercy. He scattered the people, confused their tongues, not to punish but to protect. He knew that unchecked unity in evil would only lead to ruin. By dividing their speech, he preserved their souls. By confusing their words, he clarified their future. It is a lesson wrapped in paradox. Sometimes division is a gift. Sometimes the breaking of language is the beginning of wisdom, because if man cannot agree in pride, he may yet seek truth in humility. And yet the seeds of Babel scattered with the people. They carried their stories, their gods, their rituals. They renamed their deities. They built new cities. They etched the same symbols into new stones. From Sumer to Egypt, from Canaan to Greece, from Babylon to Rome, the same spiritual pattern unfurled. The divine feminine was enthroned. The sacred prostitute was glorified. The knowledge of the gods was sold as wisdom. And Nimrod's blueprint lived on. But there is a deeper truth that cuts through the myth. In the very land Nimrod once ruled, God called a man named Abram. Out of Ur he called him, away from the temples of Inanna, away from the shadow of Babel. And to Abram he revealed a new covenant, not of domination, but of promise, not of many gods, but of one. That is the divine counter to Babel, not a tower, but a tent. Not a city of stone, but a journey of faith. Not a priesthood of manipulation, but a family of obedience. Babel was built to reach heaven. Abraham walked to follow it. And this is the turning point. For while Nimrod enslaved nations through unity without truth, Abraham birthed nations through faith without fear. One built to ascend, the other bowed to obey. One crowned himself God, the other called upon the name. Today, we stand between both legacies. The echoes of Babel still ring. The spirits of ancient deities still seek worship in modern forms. But the promise still stands. The God who broke Babel still builds altars, not in temples but in hearts, not with bricks but with truth, not in pride but in peace. So what will we build? Are the gods of old truly dead, or do they thrive in the rituals we now call culture, the technologies we now call progress, the ideologies we now call liberation? Comment your thoughts. Do you see the spirit of Babel alive today? Are we ascending toward unity or falling into the same trap? Like this, if the pattern is becoming clearer to you, share it with someone whose heart still senses there is more behind the myths. And subscribe if you're ready to go deeper, because the gods of Sumer were only the beginning. In the ancient world, names were never just names. They were vessels of power, of meaning, of memory. To name something was to define it, to claim it, to preserve its essence across time and language. So when Inanna, the goddess of Sumer, appeared again and again under different names, Ishtar in Babylon, Astarte in Canaan, Isis in Egypt, Aphrodite in Greece, and even Durga in the Dravidian traditions, it was not by accident. These were not new deities. They were old spirits cloaked in new stories. And the people, scattered from Babel, carried with them not only different tongues, but a shared hunger for beauty, for power, for transcendence. And in that hunger, they rebuilt the old altars. Inanna was no ordinary goddess. She embodied contradiction, love and war, fertility and death, chaos and seduction. She was the spiritual archetype of the divine feminine, unmoored from divine order. Her symbols, doves, lions, eight-pointed stars, traveled across empires. Her myths spoke of descent into the underworld, of resurrection, of rebellion. She was both victim and victor, virgin and whore, goddess and destroyer. And to worship her was not merely an act of devotion, it was initiation into a worldview that celebrated sensual power as spiritual truth. In Egypt, Isis nursed the infant Horus. In Greece, Aphrodite emerged from the sea, radiant and irresistible. In Canaan, Astarte ruled over temple prostitution and child sacrifice. The same core spirit moved through different masks, And today she is still with us, less as a statue, more as a slogan. She speaks through media, through music, through movements that glorify unrestrained expression and call it freedom. We are told to worship ourselves, our desires, our identities, as if to feel something deeply is to know it divinely. This too is the legacy of Babel, not just scattered languages but scattered truths. Each nation took a piece of the pantheon and made it their own. The serpent was adopted as a symbol of healing and medicine. The eagle, once a sign of Anu's dominion, crowned empires. Astrology flourished as astronomy was perverted. The heavens were no longer testimonies of God's glory, but tools for personal gain. The wisdom of the fallen ones was repackaged as enlightenment. Their knowledge, mysticism, sorcery, secret rites was carried east and west, into the Vedas, into the Zohar, into the secret doctrines of priests and kings. And yet, even as the gods changed names and empires changed hands, one thing remained: the hunger in the human soul for the sacred. Every altar, even if built in deception, was a confession of need. Man was still reaching, still aching for the divine. But without revelation, he only grasped shadows. This is where Japheth enters the story, not as a footnote, but as a carrier of legacy. While Shem was given the blessing of covenant, and Ham birthed empires of rebellion, Japheth was promised enlargement. "May God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem," said Noah. His descendants, the Greeks, the Romans, the Scythians, the Persians, became the architects of Western civilization. Through them came philosophy, mathematics, language, and war. But also, through them, would one day come the roads and frameworks that would carry the gospel. The Japhethites were not priests, but they were builders, not prophets, but seekers. Their gods mirrored the same ancient spirits, but their culture prepared the world for translation. The Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, made the Hebrew scriptures accessible to the known world. The Roman roads, built by sons of Japheth, became highways for apostles. And through the empire of the Gentiles, the gospel, once whispered on desert winds, would thunder across continents. Yet even among Japheth's children, the ancient deities found their way: Zeus, Poseidon, Hades. They mirrored Anu, Enki, and Enlil. Aphrodite echoed Inanna. Apollo shone like Shamash. Their myths retold old rebellions. Their temples echoed Babel's ambition. Their philosophers, though brilliant, often confused the search for truth with the worship of mind. The West rose high, but still built towers. The lesson is not that all culture is evil, but that all culture must be redeemed. Japheth's enlargement was not only geographical, it was spiritual. He was called to dwell in the tents of Shem, to come under the covering of revelation, to be grafted into the story of God. And when he did, when Gentiles believed, they fulfilled that promise. But when he refused, when knowledge became pride and freedom became idolatry, he repeated Babel's curse. We see this clearly today. The West, built on the memory of truth, now rewrites its foundations. The symbols return: the star of Inanna in fashion, the serpent in logos, the eagle in ideology. Old gods wear new suits, and spiritual hunger is fed with spectacle, not substance. We teach children to believe in themselves, but not in the Creator. We glorify the body, but forget the soul. We reach for the heavens with science, but silence the heavens when they speak back. And yet, not all is lost. The scattering of Babel was not the end of the story. At Pentecost, the tongues were redeemed, the Spirit fell, and people from every nation heard the wonders of God in their own language. It was a reversal of Babel, not by force, but by fire. Not by pride, but by promise. The nations that once divided now united in truth, not around a tower, but around a cross. This is the true calling of humanity, not to build monuments of self, but to become temples of the Spirit. Not to worship the stars, but to follow the one who made them. Not to seek forbidden knowledge, but to walk in revealed wisdom. So, as the gods of old continue to whisper through culture and power and pleasure, we must listen for a different voice, the still small voice that called Abraham out of Ur, that met Moses on Sinai, that walked with fishermen by the sea, that wept over cities, that rose from tombs. That voice does not seduce, it invites. It does not flatter, it frees. It does not demand sacrifice. It became the sacrifice. Let us remember, the eagle may soar, the serpent may slither, the goddess may sing, but only the Lamb saves. What symbols have you seen re-emerge in our time? Are we witnessing history or prophecy unfolding? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Like this if your eyes are opening to the echoes of the ancient world in our modern age. Share it with someone who still believes the gods of old are just myth. Subscribe if you're ready to keep uncovering the truth hidden in plain sight, because the battle for worship is not over. It has only begun. They say history is written by victors, but the truth is often whispered by survivors. And through the silence of centuries, a thread remains. A golden, sacred thread that weaves from Eden to Babel, from Sumerian temples to desert altars, from the voice of the serpent to the cry of the prophets. In every age, that thread has been pulled, twisted, nearly severed, but never lost. Because it is not merely a story, it is a calling. In the ruins of every fallen empire, beneath the dust of every abandoned ziggurat, and within the broken dreams of every idol once worshipped, there is a stillness. That stillness echoes the words we were made to hear before we were ever taught to speak. You are mine. Not mine as possession, but as beloved. Not mine as prisoner, but as purpose. That is why the fallen ones still seek worship, because you were born to worship. That is why false gods still demand sacrifice, because you were created to offer something sacred. That is why deception still thrives, because truth still transforms. And perhaps that's why you're here. Not just because of curiosity about Nimrod, Inanna, Anu, the Nephilim, or the Sumerian gods. Not only because ancient religions and fallen angels fascinate the intellect, but because deep down your spirit remembers. It remembers Babel, not as a myth, but as a warning. It remembers Eden, not as legend, but as home. It remembers the moment before the fall, when everything was still one voice, one heart, one light. That memory cannot be erased, not by time, not by empire, not by technology. And in a world where everything feels divided, confused, overwhelmed, your soul still longs for the Most High, the real one. Not Enki, not Marduk, not the ones who demanded your allegiance in exchange for your peace, but the one who gave himself so you could find peace. El Elyon, the God above all gods, the name above every name. We are not just observers of history, we are participants in a pattern. The gods of old may no longer be carved into stone, but they are still worshipped in algorithms, in ideologies, in the temples of self and screens. The same serpent speaks, the same eagle soars, the same crown is offered, not of righteousness, but of pride. And yet the invitation remains. Come out of Babylon, come out of Babel, come into light. This is not the end of the story. Not yet, because something is awakening. People are beginning to ask the right questions again. They're not just consuming content, they're searching for clarity. They're not just studying myth, they're longing for meaning. And maybe you feel it too, that stirring, that ache, that holy unrest that reminds you you were made for more than survival, more than information, more than opinion. You were made for truth, for love, for eternity. If this video brought a seed of that truth into your life, if it stirred something sacred in your chest, or brought light into a dark moment, I invite you to help me keep going. Sometimes all it takes is a little encouragement to keep the fire burning. If you feel led to send back a small piece of the light you've received, it would mean more than words can say. Every ounce of support, every gesture of kindness, every breath of energy you offer helps me keep creating, keep studying, keep speaking life where lies have ruled too long. And if today's message touched something deeper in you, I gently ask, like this video so others can find it. Subscribe if your soul is hungry for more. Leave a comment, even one line, about what stirred you most. I read them all, and each one is like a prayer returned, a flame rekindled. A reminder that I am not speaking into silence, but into hearts. What do you believe is the greatest deception the world has accepted? Do you see the spirit of Babel in today's culture, in today's leaders, even in today's religion? Or have we unknowingly crowned the old gods in new disguises? Let the discussion unfold, not in argument, but in awakening. Thank you, truly, with all my heart. Thank you for your time, your trust, your presence in this sacred space. This isn't just a channel. This is a journey back to the real, back to the ancient truth, back to the voice that calls you by name even now. Let the towers fall. Let the lies unravel. Let the light rise. Because once you hear the truth, you cannot unhear it.